Hello. So, I've been thinking about ways to document my processes. I have an absurd amount of processes for managing all sorts of stuff in my life because I'm a control freak. And this is how I handle content. And by content, I mean the things that I read, the YouTube videos that I watch. How do I make sure that all of this knowledge is getting stored and used effectively in the future? So I'm not just spinning my wheels reading random crap all day long. So this is Content Management for Academics, TM, a stupid little presentation that nobody asked for by Nathan Landry. If, for some reason, you find this useful, you can check out more of my other stuff at nathanlandry.com. Okay. Oh, there we go. Now, because I can't take myself seriously for more than 5 minutes at a time, we're going to be using the digestive system as our model for how I handle content. So there's 4 stages that I like to think of. There's consumption, right? How do we watch these videos? How do we read newsletters, articles, blog posts, books? If you're smart like that, research papers and all of that kind of stuff. How do we actually go about that in a storable fashion? Step 2 is actually doing the storing. How do we consolidate it in a place where I can go back and get it later? 3 is review. So after spending all of this time reading and watching YouTube videos and stuff, how do I make sure that all of this information doesn't just get lobbed into the digital ether and then lost forever, and I've just done nothing but waste my time? So review is important. And then lastly, using. How do we actually use this information to do something, useful, to create new knowledge and new stuff? But yeah, we're going to start with consumption. What is the mouth, the esophagus of content consumption by Nathan Landry? How do we get that knowledge? Let's take a look. Oh, you can see my previous take. It did not go well. So, I use a couple of apps and websites and stuff like that. We're going to kick things off with my favorite of the bunch, which is Reader. So, when I get to storage, we'll talk about Readwise. But right now, we're going to focus on the Reader portion of Readwise. So Reader is a fantastic app for reading things later, storing articles and stuff like that on the internet for later. It does a couple of things that a lot of previous generation read it later applications don't do. So let's start with some of the really cool features. One of the reasons that I chose to use it over basically anything else is YouTube videos. So let's see if I can find a YouTube video. Ah, yes, we love Vervaeke. So I watch these YouTube lectures, right? Really long lectures, and I want to make sure that I'm taking notes in a way that I can, come back to them later. And one of the cool things about Readwise is it generates these transcripts for you, because everything comes with AI these days, and you can just highlight as you watch the video along. Really, really good for recall. Now, another nice thing is you get all of these highlights from all of the important parts of the video that you decided on, and you can actually use like GPT-3 style large language models to generate question and answer pairs from your highlights, so you can do review that way. You can do cool things like create auto-generated summaries of whatever content you're consuming, all of that good stuff. So the Readwise Reader does that really nicely. It also does like normal things, right? You can load up PDFs, right? So here's an introduction to philosophy, because I'm pretentious like that. And so you have this perfectly usable PDF reader, nice table of contents on the left. Highlighting is really simple. There's also the Readwise app on iOS, Android, tablets, all of that stuff. So you don't have to sit down at your desktop and be like, yes, I will drag my mouse across to highlight all of this content. Another nice feature of the Reader is emails. So I already get enough emails, and if I get email newsletters in my like business email type stuff, I'm never going to see them, or I will see them and go, now's not the time. So how do I actually get to that content in a way that I'll actually review it? Readwise Reader comes with an email specifically for the application, and you can send that out whenever you're signing up for newsletters and stuff like that. So, for example, we can look this Ali Abdaal video because of course we consume that productivity content. Yeah, and it works really, really well. It renders them beautifully. You can do all of the highlighty stuff, all of the normal things. I think you can even do tweets, but like, who wants Twitter? I don't know. RSS feeds as well, but I don't do very much of that. But if you do, Readwise has you covered. So okay, there's my first thing. That's how I handle YouTube videos, some PDFs and stuff like that. Cool. Next up, because there's no value in just engaging with content for fun. No. We have to extract every drop of knowledge all the time. And for that, I use SnipD when I'm listening to podcasts. SnipD also generates transcripts, and you can go ahead and just highlight the transcripts as you're listening instead of like whipping out your notes app and furiously typing instead of listening anymore. SnipD does that. It's on Android, iOS, all of that stuff. Cool beans. Of course, Kindle. This is where I handle most of my like chill reading. So if it's like pop science or productivity books or like not or fiction, all of that I do through Kindle. I've got my trusty Kindle over here, and yeah, easy again. You can highlight through your Kindle, send those off to whatever syncing tool you're using, and yeah, we love Kindle. Next up is Zotero. So for the academics in the room, Zotero is a citation. Wow, a citation. What does that mean? A citation management application. So it's really great. There's an extension for most browsers when you're going through Google Scholar or whatever institution's library you're using. Once you come across an article, you can just snip it straight to Zotero. It'll load it up. So you have a title, you have like author information, abstract, and then the full PDF gets loaded. So I'll show you this. Which virtual desktop is it? There we go. So here's an example. I've got the effects of computer programming on young children's cognition. I can open up the PDF in Zotero's little reader, and it's just really good. I have this on my iPad as well, and so whenever I highlight stuff like this, I send it over to my little to Readwise to do the syncing of highlights later, and it's just a fantastic way to keep track of all of the papers you have to read as an academic. It also auto-generates bibliographies for you. Now, you'll have to, in various formats too, but you'll have to make sure everything's correct, but it's a really strong starting place. Really great way to keep track of all of that stuff. Okay, I think I have one more thing. Yes, when I have absolutely no attention span whatsoever, or somebody who their book recommendations have been sketchy in the past, I use Blinkist. So Blinkist is an application that does like 10 to 30 minute audio summaries of books. So if I'm like, maybe I'll like this book, but maybe I won't, I go through the summary first and then check if it's going to be useful to me. And yeah, then after that, I can move on. So it's great for when I'm on the bus or something like that because I get motion sick like a loser and I can't read. So I can listen to them. Now, also, Blinkist does transcripts of their audiobooks or their audio summaries. So you can send those off to your Kindle as well. And you can, if 30 minutes of listening is too long for you, you can read those summaries in less time. Really optimizing for shitty attention spans. So yeah, there's all my consumption stuff. Let's jump back to my presentation. Okay. After we have consumed the content, then we must store it in the stomach. Or, yeah, this is already falling apart because digestion happens in the stomach too, but whatever. So we have to put that knowledge somewhere, and I'm going to show you how I handle that. There are two major places where I put knowledge or information or highlights or whatever you want to call them. Put knowledge sounds really, really pretentious. So Readwise is the app that I've been talking about. And what it does is it syncs all of your highlights, or at least that's one of its functionalities. That's all the functionality it had when I started. And then they started adding more and more cool features. So we love that. Let's take a look at the dashboard. So Readwise allows you to import from various platforms, right? Like Kindle, all of the stuff on the Reader app immediately gets synced. For things like Zotero, when I'm doing reading of like papers and PDFs, you can email them over to Readwise. So if you don't, if they don't have a built-in integration, you can just email PDFs and stuff like that over to the add at Readwise thing, and then boom, they sync. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So let's look at books. Oh yeah, on the cognitive effects of learning computer programming. That's some deep shit. Here's all of the citations from that. And so I have access to them at any time. I can edit them to make sure. I can favorite, tag, share them with other people, all sorts of useful stuff. And so I have access to basically everything I've ever read paper-wise, which is really, really useful when you're doing literature reviews and stuff like that years later. I don't have to go back and reread the full paper or like ask myself, oh man, what paper was that? It's just there. I got it. So that's really cool. The other useful thing is Readwise allows you to export. So I export to Roam. Let's go ahead and use Roam Research for a second. Okay, so Roam Research is this like graph-based knowledge management system, I guess. It's really just like a bunch of connected markdown files like Obsidian or many, many other applications. I chose Roam because it was the first one that I found. So let's take a look at my computational thinking Roam graph. So you get this graph overview of all of the stuff. So for example, let's say I want to look at all of the highlights from the paper Tips for Teaching Procedural Skills. All of them get synced up over here. Now the cool thing about Roam is sort of the connecting feature. So let's say I want to find all of the stuff related to like, I don't know, let's see, procedural stuff, procedural skills. I can take a look and we can see all the highlights and content where procedural, the word procedural was mentioned. And so I can look at things by concept instead of by where it came from, which is really great when you're going through the literature review process. You don't want to think about, okay, well, this paper said this, and then this paper said this, and then this paper said this. You want to think about what did the field say about this topic, and then go through the specifics, right? And so Roam just helps me do that. So that's how I store the Readwise for just generally syncing, and then Roam for going back to stuff and being able to link it by concept instead of by like source. Cool. That's fun. Where's my presentation? Okay, so we've stored some crap. Now we have to digest it. How do we review this stuff so that we don't just forget all of it? Well, once again, Readwise has come up with this very, very useful feature, the daily review. So you can configure this in many ways, but basically they just send you a couple highlights every day from stuff that you've read. And you get this sort of like spaced repetition thing. So I can see, here's a quote from Mindset by Carol Dweck that I thought was useful. Apparently, every marriage demands an effort. That sounds like a fact. I'm cool with that. We'll keep it. And it just goes through and I read through these things. But how do I make sure that I'm actually actively engaging with this, right? Just rereading stuff isn't generally very useful. So I have a little review system where I use Notion. So what I'll do, let's go through first. I have a couple categories. So I have just general daily review, basically everything I read, see what shows up. I've been learning a little bit of cognitive science, so I hit up 5 cognitive science highlights per day. Stuff from productivity books, intro to psychology is something that I've been looking at, some philosophy, that sort of stuff. I just trust that I remember computer science, I guess. But yeah, I go through each one of these reviews, and then I use Notion. So let's take a look. So what I'll do is I'll copy paste the citation, and then I will try to summarize it in a much shorter amount of time. So this way I'm sort of, or amount of words, because that's how summarizing works, right? You don't summarize in more words. That's no longer a summary. But yeah, this way I'm actively engaging with the content, right? I have to understand what the concept being expressed is and then try to reduce it into something simpler. And I hope that's effective. We'll see. But I just go through all my highlights like that. And then to follow that up, let's hope that I manage to do this every day of the week. Usually it's more like 3 or 4 if I'm lucky. And then I do a weekly review where I sort of try to summarize even further and then start to categorize things. So, for example, I take the summaries. Let's say I have this mindset quote. So I would take my summary, toss it into this weekly review, and then think about, okay, what was the major topic here, and what other things have been said in the highlights that I looked at this week, and start to put them together. And this way I'm slowly assembling a larger and larger view of fields that I'm learning about. Boom. There you go. Also, Notion has these beautiful auto-generated table of contents, so I can look at, oh, wow, look at all these things all these topics that I studied this week. That's pretty cool. So there you go. There's the review process. When I'm doing specific literature reviews, I do a slightly different process. This is just for like, cool, I've been learning some stuff. I want to actively engage with it, but I'm not trying to produce anything right now. I just want it floating around in my brain. So when I am trying to do things like literature reviews, stuff like that, I go back to Rome. And that's not what I'm looking for. Where's the actual Rome? Haha. And I start looking for concepts or major papers that really mattered to me. And I start with Freeform or OneNote. The important part is that I have some sort of application that allows me to like drag and drop ideas all over the place. And just like start to drag them around, look at them in a big scope, and then zoom in. I just need to be able to manipulate the level of detail that I'm looking at and have just a lot of control over how I look at things. So you can see this is me brainstorming some of those concepts on knowledge transfer with programming. And I'm going through some of these papers, summarizing some of the key ideas, looking at important quotes, and just dropping them on Freeform. I can also look at another example when I was using OneNote, because Freeform just came out. And let's see, where's my... I've got it here somewhere, I swear. Some of the brainstorming that I've been doing. This was a brainstorm that I did at the beginning of my thesis, where I was just looking over major concepts, drawing them together, copy-pasting things. You can see, again, the important part is flexibility, that I have this infinite whiteboard, essentially, to play with ideas. And that's how I do more review. Cool. Where's my presentation? So now we have digested content. How do we produce content? Right? Once we've digested it, how do we produce new things? And again, I use Notion for that, to start synthesizing stuff. So let's take a look at my project pots template. So this is how I keep track of ideas. I will do a longer video at some point on just this, but I like templates and checklists and processes. So whenever I have a new idea, I write it down. Here's my brilliant $1 million idea. And then I have these templates. So either it's like a research paper that I'm looking at, it's something just like a project, stuff like that. We're going to look at my paper pot template. So here, a couple of things pop up. I keep track of how much time I've spent on the idea. I have a checklist for what I do. I have a little to-do board for it, resources list, notes on just the idea, and then a little guided set of questions for, okay, what is this paper going to look like? So let's go through this one by one. So first thing I do is I look at previous paper pots and other papers. I'm like, okay, have I come up with this idea before? Do I have something similar? Should I be merging this? I don't know. Let's take a look. The lab I work at has a really big Google Drive full of great ideas. So I look for relevant keywords in that drive and see, okay, are there any resources here that I should drop in my resources section and start to go through? We also use this app called Otter, which records transcripts of meetings and stuff like that. So are there any otters that I should look at? I look at my Rome graphs, right? So what papers or concepts have I engaged with already that would be relevant here, and then I copy all of that into the resources heading. Next thing I do is I try to summarize those notes a little bit, right? So here's all this content. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. How does it apply to this specific idea, and what's like the most important part of each one of those resources? And I try to put that down, and then condense it a little bit. And then here I try to do these intermediate packets, right? I think this is Tiago Forte's idea. What little things can I produce that get me a little bit closer while actually like creating something, right? Because it's really easy to spend tons of time planning and thinking about a thing and then not actually making any progress on it. This forces me. So for example, I draft these paper pots, right? Where I'll go through these guiding questions, right? So what's my research question or user story or something like that? You know, why is the problem important? Why is the proposed solution different from something that already exists? How do we frame that paper? And so on and so forth. So I'll finish that and then, try to get some feedback from like colleagues or supervisors. And then I try to share that out. Then I sort of go through the same thing again. And okay, maybe another intermediate packet or deliverable is to write a blog post, right? If I can express the idea in something a little bit coherent but not formal, that's helpful. And then next up, let's write a draft of the paper. And then following that, okay, let's finalize it. But that's pretty much the process. The to-do board is also super helpful. But yeah, I think that's it. So let's jump back to my stupid presentation. And summarize. So first off, we gather lots of information, and I want to make sure that I'm not it's not just sticking in my brain, right? Because I don't trust my brain to actually store ideas. I want it to have ideas. So I do all of my reading and content consumption in ways that is sustainable, right, or storable. So to do that, I use the Readwise reader. I use Snipd, Kindle, Zotero, and Blinkist, and probably some other crap that I'm forgetting, but hey, that's good enough. To actually store that data, I use Readwise, and I import all of those highlights and stuff like that, right? I also use Roam to store it in a differently, ooh, is that a word? Searchable way. So I can search by content instead of source, or concept instead of source, which helps make sort of associations between stuff in a freer way. And then next up, I do my Notion reviews. So I just get handed highlights by Readwise and do that spaced repetition type stuff. But I try to actively engage by summarizing what I'm reviewing instead of just reading it. Because it's really easy to just passively like glaze over the words and think, yeah, I read that. Probably not. And then I do these weekly reviews to get a larger scope of what I've been reading, what I've been learning, and trying to fit it together in these associative ways. Something about associations making memory stronger or something. I don't know. And then last up, I try to actually use this stuff. So whenever, again, I do research, so most of my stuff is aimed at creating research papers. And the way I do that is this very structured process that makes sure that I actually review the content and I use it, right? By ensuring I go through, okay, what are my previous ideas and papers? What do I have access to from all of this content that I've been storing? How do I connect it and make it relevant to the idea that I have? And then how do I produce small producibles, small deliverables along the way to make sure that I'm actually making concrete progress? And that's the plan. That's how I do this shit. Thanks. How do I stop the video?